On this week's episode of the Autohaus podcast,
I first started at a engine machine shop. I got picked up by a Formula Ford race team. After that, I was picked up by BMW. Being on the tools for so many years, it really takes a toll on your body. I felt it was time for a change and decided to...
This is the Autohaus podcast. I am really excited today because not only is this my first guest from Australia on the podcast, but also I'm really excited finding this guy by chance just off of YouTube. Could you say your name and give yourself a short introduction?
My name's Sebastian. I'm a father of three. I run a small YouTube channel called Modify Up. I'm a qualified mechanic here in Australia, and I dabble in all things automotive, electronics, wiring, fabrication, modification. I have a small side business called Freeform Garage, which is just a small workshop I run from home after hours and on the weekends. I'm an old school Toyota purist, but I also like to mix things up a little bit, keep things fresh while still respecting the culture.
Qualified mechanic, what is that?
So in Australia, you basically have to complete an apprenticeship, which is 4 years, and then you get your trade qualifications. So then you can go ahead and open up your own workshop and do what you want. But it's basically like being a licensed electrician or, a licensed plumber or something like that. It's basically a qualification to say that, you've done your education and you're qualified to work on people's cars and you're not going to kill anyone while you're doing so.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really respect that. And I think that's missing in the stateside because literally anyone off the street can just get hired and be a, quote unquote mechanic, which is, very concerning. The public doesn't, the majority of the public doesn't know this.
I think there's a lot of really, really good mechanics that aren't formally qualified or don't have the qualifications, but it's just one of those things. It's a well-worn path in Australia. It's you either go to university or you go do a trade. So for me, I was a lazy kid. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to screw around for a year after I finish school and then go do an apprenticeship. So I thought I would mix my love for cars with something that I wanted to do every day. And, in hindsight, I think that it probably wasn't the best idea. If I have any advice for people is to keep your passions and your job separate because you can burn out really quickly doing something that you love.
Speaking about your automotive background, so the reason you and specifically your YouTube channel came up on my radar, so I don't know what I was searching for on YouTube, but it must have been transmission adapters. And I stumbled upon your video when you were making that 2AZ to TL70 adapter from a scratch piece of aluminum, and I was like instantly hooked from there.
Oh, really? Oh, thanks, man. I try and put a little bit of effort into those videos.
I think the biggest thing for me was seeing you document the process of how you were able to create that adapter and then mating it to the engine and the trans. In my mind, I was like, I have to find out this guy's story because it's like normal people don't do this. There has to be some background behind that.
Okay, let's take a walk down memory lane. So I first started at a engine machine shop, and I can tell you right now that is not a place for everybody. It's a dark dungeon machine shop. There's barely any lighting. You're around really loud machines. You're dirty all the time, and so I stayed there for a little while and picked up all of my engine building tricks and little tips and things that I could use further on in my career. And then I got picked up by a Formula Ford race team, which is basically the Australian equivalent of, say, a Formula Atlantic. So they're basically open wheel race cars. They use like a Ford, I think it's an Ecotech motor. Oh God, it's been so many years now. It's a 2-liter motor. Basically, they just put a dry sump on it, put a Hewlin gearbox on the back of it, and a new intake manifold that comes up over the driver's head. So that's basically where I learned all of my fabrication skills, and it really set me up for, further on in my career where I wanted to do, custom fabrication. And like those cars, specifically those Formula Ford race cars down in the lower tiers, Like they all look nice, and you think that okay, every single part is off the shelf because it's like a controlled racing team, but it's completely the opposite. Every single part on those cars is all handmade, fabricated, and adjusted after every single run. So it's one of those things where it's a real eye opener where there's so many things that go on behind a race team, and you just think, oh man, it would be really nice to work somewhere like that. So I was really lucky to be a part of that. After that, I was picked up by BMW. So I was preparing the Mini Cooper S's for the Targa Tasmania in Australia. So if you don't know what Targa Tasmania is, it's basically it's a rally all across Tasmania, which is like a separate island to Australia. Oh God, I'm going to make people angry by saying it's a separate island. It's part of Australia, but there's a body of water in between Australia and Tasmania. So the landscape in Tasmania is all hills, and like it's a basically one giant toge course for most people. So after doing that, I stayed there for basically one season of Targa Tasmania. And then I got picked up by a dyno tuning shop called Status Tuning. Now, they're a really prolific tuning shop here in Victoria, in Australia. And it's here where I learned basically all of my tuning. I learned all about Nissans and turbocharging 4 cylinders and stuff like that. So that was great. Like I've been blessed with my career in that I've been able to work in such high profile places. The next place I worked at was a place called UltraTune. It's basically a general repair shop. We work on, basically anything that comes in the door. And I think it's really one of those places that actually teaches you how to work on cars. Like you can work at a race team and replace parts and fabricate things, but what's the point of working at a race team if you can't diagnose like a bent distributor shaft or something like that, I've worked there for a really long time, and I think that's what really burnt me out. And while I was at UltraTune, I was picked up by a place called Force Motorworks. Now, these guys are also another really prolific name in Victoria. Donnie, this business isn't around anymore, but Donnie used to be the man for SR20 builds. He would build SR20s going out the door every single day, and these things would make like 400 kilowatts all day long. And in the Australian drift scene, there's many, many cars that have his engines running SR20s in those competition cars. There's actually one that you might know. Do you know Matt Russell from Australia?
I do not. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. No, that's cool. Make sure you check him out. He's competed in all of the local competitions. He's in the International Drift Cup at World Time Attack, and he runs an 8.6 with a SR20 as well. So, that thing puts out 350 kilowatts at the wheels, and it's done that day in, day out for the last, God, I don't know, 6-7 years. So,
This is the car
that's a
that
testament.
Suchiya drove. Is that right?
No, that
Oh,
is Bo
okay.
Yates' car.
Okay.
That car is, yeah, I think that car's for another podcast. That
Oh,
one it deserves its own podcast. So after I finished up at Force Motorworks, I wanted to stay in the automotive scene, but you know, being on the tools for so many years, like it really takes a toll on your body. And even now, my back is still not 100%, which is why I don't work on the tools day in, day out anymore. Um, so I dabbled in parts. I went into spare parts for auto transmissions, and then I felt it was time for a change and decided to start a mechatronics engineering degree. So I got a couple of years into that, and I flunked out, but I took what I learned and got a job in tech, and now I work at a automotive software company. So I think the automotive industry has been really good to me.
what is mechatronics? I'm not familiar with that either.
Mechatronics is it's two disciplines in one. It's mechanical engineering and electronic engineering. So if you think of robotics and pneumatics and fluid dynamics all together in one discipline.
Awesome. So, talk about the shop in your YouTube video. Is this the Side Hustle Freeform Garage?
Yes. This is actually at the back of my house. So we recently built a house here, and it's about 4 years ago now. I wanted a place to continue my passion with cars and, also have a way to make an income that wasn't tied to my day job. So I call it the lab because this is where I think of all of my crazy, stupid ideas that sometimes work, sometimes don't. So it's nice to have a place where, you can come and hang out and, just work through things. Some ideas are better than others and some just, you know, you think of when you're drunk and they just don't work out.
I mean, just thinking about your automotive background, just like sitting and reflecting about it right now, that seemed like really grueling to, I mean, go through all these experiences and go through like such a wide variety of, even in competition.
Hmm.
Like like thinking back on it now, what are your thoughts about it?
Look, I think, there's the racing life is for a certain type of person. If you're tied down in a relationship and you have kids, I think the racing life is not for you because you spend hours upon hours traveling. Like I reckon I spent, a good 6 months sitting in a truck with two Formula Ford cars in the back driving around Australia. And then there's, the work itself is quite difficult. And if you don't have a good driver, at any given moment, the car could come back looking like a canoe with no wheels on it at all. And then suddenly you're spending the whole night rebuilding the car just so that he can crash it again in the next morning. So, it really is, it shows you a lot about the industry and, what you need to know to be successful in it. But on the other hand, you have to sacrifice to be good in that industry. And that's something that, I tried it and I did it for a number of years, but now for me, it's time to spend time with the family and, really enjoy cars and not have to worry about, is my back going to hurt? Am I going to be able to keep doing this for the rest of my life? Whereas now I'm not working on cars every day. So when I do work on the 86 or my S13, I take the time to really enjoy what I'm doing and it becomes something different to just bolting parts onto a car and you can really express yourself in what you do and spend the time that it really needs.
Speaking of your current list of cars, we went over some show notes beforehand. One thing I'm shocked, do you really only have two cars right now?
I do. I really do.
How did you get to that point where you can only have two cars?
Well, for me, I think I had to make a decision. Like, I could have kept all of these cars, but I really needed to sell them so that I could fund building this garage that I'm sitting in right now. Um, you know, these cars now that I look back at the list and it's like the value of these cars are skyrocketing at the moment. So, you'd like to keep all of them, but it's just not feasible at the time. So, do you want to go through them?
Yeah, of course. So for the listeners, what your previous roster of cars?
Okay, so my first car, which I assume we're going to touch on later on, was it's a 1985 AE86. They're sold in Australia as Sprinters. Um, they are basically the equivalent of an SR5, which is what you guys have over there in the States. Um, so that car was my first ever car, and I bought that one when I was 16 years old. So two whole years before I could actually drive it. um, the next car I owned after that was a S13 One-Via, which I bought off my cousin. We did the One-Via conversion on it, put a big body kit on it. I resprayed it in my backyard inside a tent. And yeah, like that car is what got me into the tuning shops. Basically, I went to go get my car tuned and they saw it and they're like, hey, we're looking for somebody to work here. Do you have a resume? I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll show them a resume. And then what happened was my car had a hiccup on the dyno. The ignition coils were breaking down and, like 30-year-old Nissans, the wiring on them is just not good anymore at all. Everything's falling apart. So I picked up the car and then that night I did a individual coil pack conversion and I wired it all up and I had it ready the next day. And then the tuner goes to me, hey, did you do this yourself? And I'm like, yeah, I just, knocked it up last night. And he's like, oh, that's really good. And then that basically is what got my foot in the door in the tune shops. So I have a very special place in my heart for that car as well. Next, we have a 1JZ Cressida. That was a MX-83. I don't know what I can say about this car. It was old. It smelt funny. After after I put the 1J in it, it cracked the cradle, and then I'd had enough of that car. It leaked oil everywhere, and it was one of those things where it's like, okay, I picked up a 1J from my boss. It was just sitting at the back of the shop, so I didn't have to pay anything for it. And he said, just take it, fix it up, do whatever you want with it. So then I bought a Cressida and put it in, and it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and I wasn't willing to put the time in to make it, enjoyable. So I sold that car, and then we had the R31 wagon, which was, I called that one the Skywag. That car was also not the best car, but it was good. It was the RB30. It was still naturally aspirated, but when I bought it, it had a locked diff, so there was a lot of fun had in that car. Then we had a couple of ST246 Caldinas. This was the start of my family life where, I needed a bigger car, but I still wanted to keep in the Japanese scene, so to speak. So those ones were modified very tastefully, basically just coilovers, exhaust, mechanical diff in the back, and just intake and breathing mods, just to keep it a little bit pokier, but a nice daily driver. Then we have the ED Civic. Now, I'm not sure if you deep dive into my Instagram. This was a car that me and two other friends used together in the Nugget Nationals racing series. We made a team called Neverlift, and the ethos for that series was basically, you have $3,000 to buy a car, and then you can't spend more than $1,000 getting it up to spec. And in terms of that, there's no power modifications allowed. It's basically suspension, brakes, aero, and livery. So it started off as a joke because, if you know me, I'm really, really not into my Hondas. So, like, I respect the scene, and I understand that those cars can be super fast, but there's some things that come with the scene that I don't like to associate with. So I try and stay away from the Honda scene as a rule of thumb. But basically, we made this car as a joke. We found a picture of a Porsche GT3, and we were like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we made this ED Civic look like this Porsche GT3? And that's basically what we did. We painted the wheels red. We put red headlights on it, red mirrors on it. We put a gigantic wing on the back of it. We made a splitter made out of plywood. For the side skirts, we used rain gutters. And it was just, it's just a laugh. And it really, really was a great time driving that car, like right at the top of its life, So I sold that to my friend, and he continued to develop the car, and actually he finished second in the championship last year. So that car went on to do some great things, and now he stripped it and sold it, which has made way for another car, but that's another story. So next three cars were, these are the big ticket items where, I started to modify them properly and put actual money into them. The first one was a Jzx100 Mark II that had the full Vertex genuine lip kit on it, had work XT7s in the discontinued chrome color, had the two-way clutch, Power FC Digetro. I had a local guy in Australia build the turbo for me, which was a high flow, which was equivalent to like a GTX 35. And that thing was, like, I love that car. It was so much fun to drive and so reliable. Like, it's just the old Toyota thing where it's like, you can treat it like dirt and it'll just keep coming back day in, day out. And that car, as a drift car and a street car, was amazing. So, after a while, I got sick of the R154 gearbox with the remote shift. So I said to myself, okay, I can either do a Jzx110 gearbox in it, or I can sell the car and start a new project. So that car, the next car that I chose was an R34 Four-Door Skyline. It was a GTT, it's factory manual, factory turbo. And that thing, I put a lot of money into. We did a GTR front-end conversion on it. Had the Z-Tune guards on the front, had a CAS two-way diff, ORC twin-plate clutch. I just made that car drivable, as in it was really nice to drift, and it was also really nice to daily around. We also did the custom Midnight Purple 2 respray on the whole vehicle, and was just a really nice car to drive. So after that, I decided, okay, now it's time to start building this garage. So I sold that Skyline to build the garage. And then with the leftover money, I bought an RX-7 FC. I'm not really a rotary person, but I've always loved RX-7s. So I thought, okay, I'll dip my toe in. I'll see what's going on here. But, as it turns out, the rotary life is just not for me.
Oh,
Have you driven a rotary? Have you ever owned a rotary before?
I have never owned a rotary. Our shop right behind us is Sake Bomb, and they're like the last rotary specialist in Northern California. And
Oh, really?
they have a similar sentiment. At least one of the employees there are like, yeah, every time a FD or FC comes in here, it'll be here for months. So,
Yeah, yeah. So that car, I drove cross country to go pick it up from another state. I got it back, and then slowly it sat there and really didn't do anything. Um, you know, the it was a tired motor. It had been ported before by somebody who had questionable skills. It would blow smoke. It would be really difficult to start. And then when it was running, like you would drive the car for half an hour and then come out of the car stinking like fuel. It still had cats and everything, but it's just a rotary thing, You smell like premix oil and E85.
oh no.
That's what happens when you drive a rotary. Um, so yeah, and I sold that car after doing a little bit of work to it and realizing that it wasn't really for me. And then actually swapped it for my current 86. So we've come full circle now.
Before we talk about your current 86, okay, before we
hmm
even talk about that, do you, depending on what country or even where in the country you live, there's always like a particular nickname for the AE86 chassis. Can you
hmm
think of a few, like maybe regionally or in Australia? What do you guys refer to these cars to as?
we call them Hutchies or 86s. That's basically it.
Okay. Are you familiar? Like, so in California, if you say you have a Corolla, just Corolla,
hmm
people know it's AE86. Or I know in Ireland, they call them twin cams.
Okay. So in Australia, a twin cam, nicknamed Twinkie, is an AE82 Corolla, front wheel drive, still 4AGE, but that's the nickname in Australia for those cars simply because it had twin cam on the back hatch, and
Oh,
everybody refers to those cars as Twinkies.
oh, interesting.
Yeah. So if you if you were to say to somebody in Australia, I own a Corolla, they're instantly going to think AE82 or AE92
Mm.
because that is what they were marketed as in Australia. So the 86 here was always marketed as a Sprinter. So we didn't have the different tiers of spec levels in Australia. We had the simple Sprinter. That was it.
Yeah, that's right. I've heard that you guys didn't get the, quote unquote good Corolla. All you guys got
No,
was like the like our American equivalent of a SR5.
correct, correct. Now there is a rumor in Australia that there was 100 GTS models sold in Australia, which is the loophole that everybody uses in Australia to put a 4AG in those in the 86 without getting it engineered because it was offered from the factory as a 4AG. Whether it holds any truth or not, I'm still yet to see a factory Australian delivered GTS model. I just don't think they exist. I think it's just something that somebody along the lines, somebody said something on Club 4AG or Toy Mods or something like that, and it's just turned into this rumor where people believe that there's 100 models delivered to Australia. So I don't know. Maybe one of your listeners can shed some light on that and tell us if it's true or not.
So if Sprinter was the only model you guys got, does that
Mhm.
mean you had to convert every single one of them to up to GTS spec? How did that work?
Correct, correct. So we are only offered the 4AC in Australia. So any 4AG 86 in Australia is either an imported GTS model or somebody has done the conversion. And an easy way to tell is, if you see an 86 in Australia, does it have a hole in the timing cover, which will signify whether that was front wheel drive or rear wheel drive.
Oh,
That's the
okay.
easiest way to tell.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And then what are you guys doing for rear ends?
Rear ends, we are pretty lucky here that we have a lot of Hiluxes here. So most people are going for the, I think it's a G series rear end, but it's actually quite a heavy axle. So I think the best trade off is the F series, which is like the MA70 Supra.
Hmm.
That's a 7.5-inch crown wheel,
What does the
and
Hilux have?
the Hilux has I think it's an 8.5 inch.
Okay.
So it's really heavy. It's like 300 kilos or something.
Yeah, we're
But
even worse in the US. Ford 8.8 is the popular swap, which is giant.
yeah, I've seen that. Is that the same sort of thing where you're cutting the mounts off like an S series diff and welding them on, or people making adapter brackets? Or what's the story with the 8.8?
So 8.8, the ends have to get shortened, and then luckily there's companies that make like bracket kits for like the four links and the spring purchase. So that's been the most popular out here in the US so far.
Okay. What about braking options? Because with our Hiluxes, they're all 5x114 stud pattern, and again, they need to be shortened, and it just becomes, like a difficult task to really find a bolt-in solution.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure what people are doing for brakes on those Ford 8.8s. I don't know if they're leaving like, so a lot of them come from the Ford Explorer SUVs. I don't know if they're just leaving the factory disc brakes on there or what, but that's a really good
Okay.
question. I'll actually have to dig into that one.
Yeah, because there's not really a lot of options for the F Series diff either. There's, the MA Supra MA70 Supra came with disc rear end, but finding those in Australia is like finding a unicorn. They just simply don't exist anymore. So, people who have gone to adapter brackets, they're making brackets to use S13 rear calipers or Skyline rear calipers, and then you have the issues with, trying to find a drum brake setup to work for the park brake, and it just becomes an arduous task that, I think there should be a more elegant bolt-in solution out there that nobody's thought of yet.
Yeah, I totally agree. And can you guys even get MA rear axles or I'm sorry, rear ends in Australia right now? I mean, they're pretty much extinct here stateside.
Yeah, pretty much. So most of the F series diffs come out of YR22 Turagos, which I'm not sure. Did you guys get Turagos over there? They might be called as steamers or
Estima,
something different.
gee, is that a van?
Yes.
Okay, so we got the Toyota Previa, but up only until like the early 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So that's the one.
Okay.
So the YR22 Turago, it's a 2.2 liter. It's got the F series diff in it, and it is the correct width. I think it's 1440 millimeters in width. So the physical size is perfect. You just need to cut the mounts off your standard diff and weld them on. But the problem is, finding those diffs. It's ridiculous right now. There's just simply none around. They're extinct, like you said. And if you try and find an MA70 Supra one, that's even harder. Like it's just not going to happen for you. So I think that's why more people are going down the Hilux route, even though that it is a heavier diff and it will upset the balance of the car. But you're just simply left with no other choice.
I feel, man, I took a big sigh because I feel like that's getting to be for a lot of AE86 parts now. Is like, well, you're really left with no choice at this point.
Yeah. But look, man, even you've interviewed some really, really prolific people on your podcast. You know what? I wanted to say that before I actually really looked into your channel, I'd actually seen a lot of your videos before, and I didn't realize who you were until I started looking into your channel.
Oh
Like
wow.
I remember watching your interview with Takae Ono, and I'm like, oh wow, I didn't even realize that was you.
Oh,
And then I watched the video of when you interviewed Rico at SEMA, and I'm like, oh man, I've seen this like 3 times. I still didn't click that it was you. I'm like, oh wow. So I just want to say thank you for having me on the podcast, man. I'm really honored to be here, and what you're doing for the 86 community. It's like I really respect what you're doing.
oh, thank you so much, man. Like, what's it called? I guess how do you say it? I don't know why. Like I really enjoy what I do. I love the cars. I love the community. And but by that same token, I'm really low key. Like as much media work as I do, I still don't like to be like the star of the show. So
So let me ask you a question.
okay.
How do you manage your home work life whilst keeping a presence on YouTube? Because I know for me, it's really difficult to find the time. Like, my video styles it's not like the vlog type where you can just talk into a camera and then load it up. Like I painfully have to edit every second of my videos, and I have to script them and I have to make sure the technical data is correct. And, there's a lot of work that goes into it. How do you manage your time whilst still, I see you're posting like every second day. So
Oh,
how do you do that?
okay. So first of all, that's one thing. Like I feel like if you're not a content creator, like that's one of the things I also saw with your videos is like, dude, this takes a long time to edit and like all the
Mm.
back end work to make this video. So I mean, first of all, kudos to you because I unless like you've been behind the scenes, you see these videos and like, oh, it's fun to watch, but you don't realize the work that goes behind it.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely.
But it's I guess this is a little bit of a deeper question, but the short answer is I do not have a work life balance. It is 96, 97% work, I would say.
Yeah,
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 yeah. Even I've had to learn to take breaks, like just like physically, I'm gonna break down.
yeah,
uh,
yeah. I was gonna say, man, that's not healthy for you. You gotta find some time for yourself,
no, I know, everyone says it, but yeah, I mean, so I mean, rolling all the way back, the uh, the start of the end of last year, I actually quit my day job to run the Autohaus full time. So that means, the physical shop work plus all the media work. And, I was, because I took this leap of faith, like I wanted to put my, 110% into it. I
Mm,
wasn't just going to go like halfway and be like, oh, well, it didn't work out. It's like, I need to put all my effort into it. So like, unfortunate reality, even if it doesn't work, at least I know like I still put my heart into it. I didn't go half ass it.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And it's hard, really, just to, you know, get the motivation just to do something on some days. So you can have, 5 or 10 videos lined up, but then you got to edit them. You got to find the time to actually make the magic. It just doesn't do it itself.
oh, I know the biggest struggle for me is like because I am essentially documenting, not really creating. So like when a customer car is here, I'll document. The
Yeah,
the toughest part for me is knowing that like, hey, you need to stop and bring out the camera right now. And that's the toughest part for me, right? Because then physical work's not getting done, everything else gets delayed. But
yeah,
I have to remind myself that like the camera's got to come out because that's equally as important. And then
exactly,
the same thing,
exactly,
like even if like you're not in a good mood or you're tired, you still got to have the camera presence because
exactly.
yeah, right. Like willing yourself to like you need to get up and do this, right? I think that's the toughest
Yeah,
part for me.
yeah. Well, you're a lot further down the YouTube path than I am, and I hope in the near future that I'd be able to be somewhere near your stature.
Oh my god.
So congratulations on hitting that 1,000, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, I sincerely appreciate it. And you're definitely too kind because I mean, we both know like it's too easy to like look at what other people are doing like, 10,000, 100,000 subscribers, but I just take it,
Yeah.
one step at a time. Like I find a cool benchmark. Like I want, at first it was like 100, like cool, I have 100, then 500, right? And then 1,000 kind of
Mm,
snuck up on me. But I set a goal and like take measurable steps. Like how can I get to this next goal, right? Next milestone.
yeah. How do you handle the trolls?
Oh
Do you
man,
read every single comment?
I do, I do. And let's see. So I guess a couple things that kind of that first of all, like I'm very fortunate that everyone else in the shop has been really supportive. So like, I'll get like a negative comment and because everyone else in the shop is supportive, they see it too, and I'll get insight from
Mm.
them. And someone who Steven Van's been on the podcast before. He's a Battle Garage employee, and he told me,
Hmm.
like, what's interesting is that you can tell you're getting more successful now because now you're getting like the trolls, the hate in your DMs. Um, like I just did that podcast with James Pumphrey, and that was probably the most what's it called? The most like divisive one for my listeners, right? That was the first one where listeners like commented like, "Hey, I'm not going to listen to this one."
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, yeah.
Dude, tell me more about this.
Oh, okay. We'll
Wait. Let's back it up. Let's
yeah,
back it
yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah, sure.
What is the deal with Humphreys? What do people just not like him, or do people view him as a sellout? What's the story?
Oh, tough call, man. Tough call.
Personally, I love Donut Media, so
Yeah, yeah,
I have no beef there. And
yeah,
and you know what? I don't even hold an opinion of Humphreys. I think that what they're doing is great.
yeah. You know what? I'll we'll cut this part out. I can talk like offline, but for the
It's too hot. It's too hot.
but for the
All right,
podcast,
we'll skip that one.
yeah, well, I'll tell you like a little bit. So there is some controversy about some of the donut media sources. Like, are they factual? Did they ask for permission? So there's
Uh-huh.
controversy
Uh-huh.
behind that, and I think unfortunately because James is the face, right? When you think of donut, you think
Uh-huh.
of him. Unfortunately,
Yep.
when you're the face, you're the one who catches the flack, right? Nobody reads the
Yeah, of
credits and
course.
like finds like, oh yeah, writer A got that fact wrong. So I'm gonna go find them. Yeah. Unfortunately, when you're the face, you're the one who catches all the heat, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As far as trolls, this is like I do a lot of studying for you know finding success or like finding strategies for both social and business. And one thing really important that I found is interacting with your audience. So even if it's like a negative comment, there's still like a positive way to react, right? So I mean, I can remember this one podcast with like a female customer, and like somebody like left a negative comment about her. And
Mm.
I was like, hey, I appreciate the support. I'm sorry that, you know, this, something negative. Let me know what we can do in the future for the podcast. So there's always like a
Mm.
positive spin you can put on it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it's always a good opportunity to, try and turn it around. But, there's people that just try to get a reaction out of you. And it's those people that you really need to ignore, I think.
Yeah. I guess I've been fortunate in the regard where I haven't been trolled too often or too hard, but I'm
Mm.
sure there'll be a point soon where I'll have to learn to deal with it. So we went a little bit down the rabbit hole, but that's perfectly
Yeah,
okay.
sorry.
No, no, no. That's perfectly okay. Going back to Corolla. So your first Corolla when you bought at 16 years old,
Hmm.
tell us about the experience of your very first 886 Toyota Corolla.
Okay, all right. My first 8.6. So to me, it's very nostalgic. I spent my early teen years watching best motoring videos with my cousin. He had, God, he had some cool cars as well. He had a GDIR Pulsar. He had a S12 Gazelle. My uncle actually had an 8.6, which I didn't know about, and he sold it just before I decided that I wanted to buy one. Um, so I was 16 years old. I'd saved up like $1,500 or something. So I went to my dad, hey, can we go halves on a car? And my dad was lucky enough to say yes. He's himself has had some classic Toyotas in his time, so he understood what the draw was with this vehicle. So yeah, we found a car and then I bought it. It's completely stock. I mean, completely stock. 4AC, stock suspension, even had the stock wheels on it. And, at that age, you just really don't know what you had. Like, I look back at it now, that car had no rust in it. Like, the interior was completely perfect, uncracked dash. Um, I just started modifying it the way that I saw that I wanted to do it. Obviously, I had heavy influence from best motoring and, initial D. I think that's where a lot of kids my age, I'm 32 now. A lot of people my age got their influence from initial D. But yeah, my brother had a, funny, we were talking about Twinkies before. My brother had a Twinkie as well. And his one caught on fire.
Oh my God.
So there was some electrical issues at the back of the car or something, and something caught on fire, and the whole interior was burnt out. So we bought it back from his insurance company, and then I got to work stripping the motor, and you know, I started to transplant it into my 86. And at 16 years old, you really have no idea what you're doing. I had no, formal training at that point, and it was just pure passion. I wanted to get in there and do the conversion myself and, learn every little piece of the car. And, these cars are so simple that, even a 16-year-old can do a conversion on something like this. But, I look back now, I did some things with the car that I regret. Like I always wanted a J Blood bonnet, but, in Australia and being 16 years old, you don't have that much cash. So I made a homemade drop vent. I cut the webbing out of the bonnet, the underside of the bonnet, and did like a little C cut and made my homemade drop vent. I flared the guards myself with just a hammer, and it started to look like a car that was modified by a 16-year-old. So I love that car, and once I'd done the 4AG conversion, I locked the diff in it, and I learned how to slide, and then that car's really what taught me basically all of the fundamentals of drifting. And there's just a feeling that you get from a car like an 86 that you really can't get from any other car. It's a combination of the lightweight, the perfect balance, the steering feedback, non-power steering, and the suspension geometry that just lets you know how much grip you have in the front, and you can feel everything that the car's doing. And I think that's something that's lost in a lot of the newer, well, I'd say almost all of the newer cars these days, that it's a really disconnected feeling for the driver to push a car at its limit than say a car from that era of the 80s and early 90s. But that car, I kind of got sick of it, and looking back now is definitely a big mistake. I sold it to one of my friends that I was at trade school with, when I was doing my apprenticeship, and he completely totaled it around a tree, and that was it. That was the end of that car. And if I could buy it back now, even if it was destroyed, I would still buy it. But it got crushed into a little cube, and that car will always have it's nostalgia to me, because all of my first times of doing this, first time learning how to heel toe, first time doing a feint drift, or first time learning how the weight transition will change in the wet. A lot of my driving came from that car, and there's just those things you can't recreate. So I hold a really high regard for anybody who's driven an 86 and understands what the draw is with these cars.
A couple of parallels I wanted to mention. So, first of all, you shouldn't feel bad that the first mods you did on your car, because influences from best motoring, that's really good compared to, I think, stateside, especially us here in California. Our first influences were probably Fast and the Furious. So, I mean, our first
really?
mods were probably like neon lights and stickers. So,
Oh, really? Oh, geez.
yeah, yeah. Oh, geez, this is exactly what I'm thinking. But
But that style's coming back now.
oh,
I see it a lot here in Australia, where you know there was a time in the 90s where if you ran neon lights, you would you know you'd be embarrassed to get out of your car at a car meet. But now people are putting lights on everything. The big body kits are back, big wings, and it's like time is repeating itself again.
yeah, exactly. And then not even just for sport compact, bro trucks are really popular in America, and like yeah, all
Yeah.
that Fast and Furious stuff is popular on bro trucks too. So, and then kind of another parallel, worldwide, I think we've all had this regret about we didn't know what we had, and we either sold it, gave it away, or got rid of it too soon.
Ah, tell me about it.
Yeah.
Tell me, even still today, like I can remember the exact moment where I threw parts out thinking, nobody's going to want this. Why would anybody want this? Like, I remember with my first 86, I stripped the whole aircon assembly out of the car. I'm talking like under dash, everything. I had a complete working aircon. It was ice cold, and I'm like, why would anybody want this? And now, like even for me trying to find that now, it's just impossible.
Nope, I did the exact same thing. I can probably do one better. So I had perfectly good air conditioning. I actually converted it to R134.
Hmm.
And then I decided, hey, this is a race car, so I'm going to take all of it out. And then here I am. Like, that was probably the worst decision of my life.
Yeah, yeah. It's just, I mean, you don't think about those things at that time, do you? Like, I remember throwing away all of the body parts from my first S13, and these parts were like absolutely mint. And my parents had, I was storing them at my parents' house, and they'd had enough. So they're like, "You got to get rid of all of these parts." So I ordered a big dump master bin and threw away everything, thinking that nobody would want them. And now people are putting up, wanted to buy posts, and the money that these things are going for is just ridiculous. You just think, man, I could have had that for $20 back in the day. Like, it's just crazy.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that resurgence with all the S chassis here in the US now, where they're becoming restoration and collector cars, regardless of, they made a lot more S chassis than they did Corollas. I'll see guys who, treat them as restoration cars now. And is crazy back in the day. You probably have the same sentiment. Like these were, less than, $1,000 US for like a good drift car, right?
Mm.
So talk more about in the beginning, how did you specifically get into this particular chassis?
Ooh. Well, to be honest, the first car I wanted to get was an MA70 Supra with the pop-up lights, and my my grandfather actually had one, and I thought it was the coolest car ever. And the first mod that my grandfather did on that car is he had a speaker that he connected to the reverse light. So every time he put the car in reverse, it would play classical music.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I remember like seeing that as a kid. I think I must have been, 6 or 7 years old and thinking, man, that is the coolest thing ever. You know, you can actually do things to your car just to personalize it and make it your own. And I think that's probably my first, foray into modifying a car is seeing, my elders do something that, is not conventional. So after watching best motoring videos and just seeing Initial D and, you know, actually making friends with people that had 86s, it became a no-brainer. Like that was the car for me. There was no other car that I wanted at that time. And still now, it's still my favorite car. Like after driving all of the customers' cars throughout the years, S chassis with, 500 kilowatts, R34 Skylines, I've driven an NSX and, there's all of these cars, but they just don't offer the same feel and nostalgia that's associated with the 86. Like the chassis itself is really, I'm going to upset some people here. It's really not that great a chassis. And you have to put a lot of money into these cars before they actually handle anything like they should. I'm not sure if you've ever driven a bone stock 86, but it's like driving a UFO.
Oh yeah, I've been fortunate to drive almost every permutation of Corolla here. So including those, so like the car that was, I have one customer car who has the supercharged, the GZE swap. And
Hmm.
at one point, he had two Corollas. He swapped suspension, so his GZE car had stock suspension in it. And yeah,
Hmm.
it was hilarious to have power, but then to have the car like wallow around, right?
Oh, it's scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
No car should feel like that.
I see in some of the show notes you gave me beforehand. So your father raced TA 22s in the Philippines.
Yeah. Um, so it was kind of a luck encounter, really. When my dad was growing up, he had a friend with rich parents, and they owned a Toyota dealership. And so one day, my dad's friend, who was meant to be driving, was sick, and they still needed somebody to drive the car. So my dad put his hand up, and then that's how he got his seat in the Philippines. I don't think he was very successful, given the way he drives now. He drives like a grandma now, and there's just some things that make me think, hey, were you really a race car driver?
Oh man.
But yeah, I think he only did a couple of races, but I see pictures of TA22s and RA28s that my dad used to own back in the Phils and also in Australia. It was the first two cars that he bought when he landed here. One was a TA22 and the other one was a RA28. So he's always loved the old Celicas and like the classic Toyotas.
Speaking of classic Toyota in the bloodline, what is up with the fascination in New Zealand and Australia with classic Toyotas?
Look, I think it's, you know, growing up, you either had like a family member or knew somebody that had an old car, and then suddenly, a couple of years ago, I don't know if they dropped in value, but there was a steady decline in value for these cars. So, a number of years ago, you could pick these cars up so cheap. I'm talking like less than $3,000. And in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, everything has skyrocketed now. I'm in a car club called Frush, and we have some old KE35s in there. We have some quad light front AE71s, and it's just one of those things where there's so much character in these cars that you know why would you want to drive a new car when you could drive something like that? Like, they just ooze style, and there's old MX-73 Cressidas, there's you know EP Starlets, and like there's so much choice that you can have in Australia and New Zealand because we got all of those cars and they were manufactured here. Like, there's still parts around for them here and there, but you know it's really an extension of your body, and you can express yourself in so many more ways with an older car than you can now. Like, I don't know, I guess I'd call like the BRZ GT86, I'd call that a pandemic. There's only so many body kits that you can put on those cars, and they all kind of look the same at
Mm,
some point.
yeah, yeah.
So if we had this running thing where it's like, we were going to buy an 86 and then put a Rocket Bunny kit on it. It's like, it's either that or, what else is there to do with those cars? Like, again, I'm probably going to upset some people by saying that, but, the car culture now is much different to what it used to be when, the early 2000s, when, parts were plentiful, everything was cheap coming from Japan. And, the Japanese car makers, they didn't have that downturn before the global financial crisis, and they were pumping out cars up, they were pumping out parts, and you know if there was a style that you like, guaranteed that there's a Japanese supplier that can cater for that style. Now you're really left with the big tune houses that survived that global downturn, and there just isn't as much variety or choices out there anymore.
As you were just explaining that, it kind of dawned on me that I think it's not just classic Toyota, but classic Japanese in general. Because one thing I thought
Mm.
about was that Australia and New Zealand, that's like the last stronghold for rotary right now, also.
More so New Zealand.
Okay.
There is a big rotary culture here, but it's nothing like New Zealand.
Mm,
That's like their national engine.
mm,
I
oh
think
my God.
obviously Mad Mike has had a lot to do with that,
Yeah,
but
yeah, exactly.
you know, it's everybody who gets the best rotary stuff is always comes from New Zealand. We have some really good tune houses here, like ProMaz, and there are a couple other ones, but you know, if we're talking real rotary stuff, I mean, there's only one place in the world, is New Zealand. Like,
Mm. So classic car culture is still strong in Australia, but is it for the younger generation? Is it for are the newest generation of automotive enthusiasts interested in classic Japanese?
no, I think it's definitely an older man's game now. We recently went to a car show in Melbourne here. I think it was last year, but you could definitely draw a line down the middle of the people and say, okay, these are the enthusiasts that have had this car since new, and then these are the young guys in their 30s that watched somebody have this car and now they've modified it for themselves. There's basically no young guys in the game anymore. I think, all of the younger guys are going straight for your GT86s, your BRZs, your Civics and that type of thing. Well, I wouldn't call a Civic a classic car just yet, but you could definitely draw a line in the crowd and see, where people have come from.
Yeah, I kind of get what you mean. And then similarly here, like if you went to like a general car meet, you can kind of tell, like you said, so the hot cars here in the US probably, yeah, the BRZ, the ZN6, ZC6 chassis, Civic
Mm.
Type R, all those
Yeah.
new like hot popular cars, Supra, new,
Mm.
yeah, A90 Supra. I'm curious. I was trying to find a parallel with in Hawaii, classic Japanese is also really popular, but then the same thing, it's like the youth aren't interested in it as much. And
Mm.
part of what I learned from having guests on the podcast from Hawaii is that kind of like the landscape isn't made for it. Like for example, the
Yeah.
roads are so bad that it's hard to drive a car, period, much less a classic car on the road.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's a cultural aspect there where there's a barrier to entry. Like the initial outlay for the vehicle is quite expensive.
That's
And
right.
then once you have the vehicle, oh, now you got to do rust repairs. Oh, now you got to spend 6 months chasing that one part. It's not a young player's game where, it's all about that instant gratification. Like you can't just go on eBay and, say, I want, this seat or something. I want an original steering wheel for a Mustang back Celica. It's like, you're not going to get that. You physically need to put the time in and know the right people and have the money waiting. Whereas, today's culture, okay, all right, well, I'm going to go to the cookie cutter section and find a part that 7,000 other people have already. And I'm just going to select that and put it on my car.
I can think of one parallel stateside where for us that are enthusiasts for classic Japanese, we're kind of stuck in this middle where like because our classic domestics, so like Mustangs, Camaros, support is so strong over here for those
Mm.
that like
Yeah.
classic domestic guys don't understand why we can't get new old stock or like reproduction stuff. And then
Yeah.
same thing like now because I think especially the A86 so hot in pop culture right now, you'll get brand new
Mm.
guys like just jump in and get one, and then they realize like the trouble they got into, right? Like, what do you
Yeah.
mean you can't get this like simple part anymore? What do you mean?
Mm.
What do you mean
Yeah.
it's discontinued? What does discontinued mean?
Yeah. And I think like the industry has come a really long way with, people like Restore Parts and, Flows making, rear quarter panels and rear beaver panels. Like that just wasn't around when I first got into 86s. Like, sure, they weren't in as bad condition as they are now. Like it's another 20 years later of rust, but there was no, restore um, suppliers back then. Whereas now you can get a whole rear quarter, you can get rear beaver panels. You got people like the 86 Preservation Society redoing whole interiors. Like, I think there is actually a lot of aftermarket support, but it's just finding it and, being willing to pay the money to get that stuff. Like it's certainly not the case in Australia. There's really nobody doing that type of work. There's a couple of resellers here in Australia that import the stuff, but in terms of manufacturing or making things here in Australia to suit these cars, it's just really not there yet.
Mm, yeah, maybe not up to that level, but you guys still have some big players in the Corolla game. So specifically, Sam from SQ Engineering, still out there
Oh,
pumping out parts.
Sam, I met Sam when I was 16 years old. The one of the first 86 meets. was down the road from my parents' house. So I went there with my dad, and I was still on my learner's permit, so he had to sit in the passenger seat with me. And we got to this 8.6 meet at the shopping center, and my dad goes, "All right, I'm going to get out so you can drive in and look cool by yourself."
Oh, nice.
So, so, so he did that, and I was a little bit nervous, so I stalled it first, and then I finally rolled up to this meet, and there's this quirky guy named Sam there, who he's showing everybody his car, and this was early days before he'd even started SQ Engineering, and just even seeing the stuff that he was doing back then, he's a real inspiration. So if you're listening to this, Sam, shout out. I haven't seen you in a couple of years, but I hope everything's going well, and your parts are just killer, man. Everybody who is anybody is running something of yours. So congratulations, man.
Going back to classic car culture, another common theme on the podcast is how do we get the younger generation not only interested in just classic car culture itself, but I mean, like any car culture, because it seems like this is a worldwide phenomenon where like the younger generation just isn't interested in cars anymore, period. Like forget motorsports, forget, tuning, just not interested in cars at all.
Hmm, that's an interesting one. I think that we've spoke about it before. The car culture is completely different nowadays. I think there's again that barrier to entry. There's the initial outlay of the vehicles, but then there's also within the industry, there are just not that exciting cars that are coming out. There's the BRZ 86. I mean, you got the new Supras coming out, but who's got the money to buy one of those and just start modifying it? Like, you're not going to expect a 20-year-old kid to go like, okay, I'm going to buy a new Supra. Like, and one, they don't even come in manual, so you know a lot of the draw there is gone. And then sure, you've got the new Z that's coming out, but a lot of the newer cars that are coming out just aren't attracting the people to modify them. Really, the BRZ 86 was a game changer because it revitalized the whole Japanese tuning industry. Without that car, there would be a lot of tuning companies in Japan that went under. So, I mean, we need more exciting cars. I think that's the takeaway there. More exciting cars will bring more people in, will bring the younger generation.
Yeah, and just to kind of build on that, you make a good point. We do have exciting cars on the market right now, but I think not attainable for your everyday guy.
Hmm.
So, like, there's a bunch of like expensive Porsches that are nice, Charger Hellcats, like Hellcat everything, but that's not, attainable for your average guy who wants to start as an enthusiast or wants to, start doing track days.
Yeah. Yeah. I think really now the entry level car would be like a Z33 or a V35 or something like that. But even then, they're still not turbo. People want that rear wheel drive, light chassis, turbocharged. If it's going to be naturally aspirated like a BRZ, it needs to be really, really light to make it exciting. There's nothing worse than having an underpowered car that's heavy. Like,
Yeah. That's a really good point because on paper it makes 200 horse, but I used to have one, and although on paper it says 200 horse, it certainly does not feel like 200 horse in that car.
yeah, they're just too heavy. But that's a path that we're going to keep going down. The cars are never going to get lighter now. Always going to be heavier and slower, and sure, you can keep adding power to it, and you know adding electronic trickery to make it feel like a light car. But the days of a light S chassis, 200 kilowatt rear wheel drive, and it's just a handful to drive straight out of the box is just, those days are gone, I think.
On a happier note, starting the YouTube channel. So, what made you decide to start this YouTube channel, Modify Up? Talk about that.
Okay, so I think it started maybe 10 years ago for my dad's 60th. Oh, that would have been 11 years ago now. My dad's 60th birthday. I bought a TA22 Celica, and I was gonna restore it and give it to him on his birthday. Now, I got halfway through restoring it. I had it resprayed. I had all of the rust cut out, but time just got away from me. So his 60th birthday rolls up, and I present him with a half-built car. Like, it had the doors on it, but it had no glass. Like, it looked pretty, but it just wasn't complete, and it didn't run. So that car sat at the house for 10 years until we both said, all right, we're not going to do anything with it. We'll sell it. So then his 70th birthday rolls up, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this properly again, because now I have the means and the time to actually build a car properly for him and give it to him for his birthday. So I bought a Z32 300ZX, and I cut all the rust out. I resprayed it, did coilovers, brakes. We went right over the car. So it's a really nice daily driver for him if he wanted to daily it. I think the only thing left to do was like the pop top seals, because the targa top was leaking, but that's neither here nor there. What I did was I documented the whole process and filmed everything so that on his birthday, we had the big screen up there, and I showed him the video of me building the car and fixing every single thing. And I think that's what really sparked the joy in what I'm doing. I guess getting a taste of it really, led me down this path, and it's now more of a creative outlet than anything. Like, you can get, a couple hundred views here and there, but what you're really doing is you're putting something out there that it's there forever, like that's, my kids are going to be able to look back in, 30 years and say, hey, my dad did all this cool stuff. Like, and I guess that goes back to my philosophy with cars, like a lot of the mods that I do are kind of quirky. They're custom, not many people do them, but don't be fooled. A lot of this stuff is driven out of cheapness, because I don't
Oh
want to
man.
spend money and pay somebody to do it. Like, sure, I've got the skills to draw something up on CAD or SolidWorks and, get something laser cut, but, where's the fun in that? Like, I could make something with my own hands instead of letting a robot do it.
So on that note, talk about the swap you're documenting and currently performing on your AE6 right now. 2AZFE with a TL70 6-speed manual transmission.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to keep it Toyota. That was one of the prerequisites. It had to be Toyota. There was absolutely, I would not entertain any other motor but a Toyota motor in there. When I got the car, it had an SR20 in it, and I had a lot of experience with them. I just don't like the way they sound, and the cylinder head design is not that good. The valve train's really unreliable. I've always loved the high revving nature of a 4AGE. In my Silvia, I've got a CA18 DET, and I specifically kept that motor because it revs a lot harder and a lot faster than an SR20. So one of my prerequisites for this build was that it had to rev to 10 grand. All right, so there's only a couple of motors that could really do that out of the box, like an F20C, like a 20 valve with a bit of work could get there. So I really wanted to do something different. So I chose the 2AZ specifically because of its younger brother, the 1AZ. Now, the plan with this motor is to destroke the motor and do a long rod conversion on it so that I can lower the piston speed and really, really rev the motor as high as I want. So after doing some calculations, I figured that I could safely rev this motor once it's fully built to 11 grand and still make power up there. Sure, I'm going to be running a G series turbo on there. Originally, I was going to run the GTX 3076, but now with the new Garrett technology, the G25 660 actually looks like a better option. It's going to give me a flatter torque curve, and I'm still going to be able to make power above 9, 10 grand, whatever it wants to be. But there were other options out there, and recently I had somebody comment on my Instagram like, why didn't you just do a K-series swap? And I'm like, well, that's putting a Honda motor in a 8.6. That's sacrilegious. Like, I could never do that. And so for me, like I really want to keep like the Toyota heritage, but do something different with it. And there are a couple of people that have already gone down this 2AZ path, but I'm still yet to find somebody that's gone ahead and destroked the motor. And these things don't like to rev past say 7.5, but hopefully with the stroker crank and long rod conversion, we get the piston speed right down, and we do a closed deck conversion on the block, and everything will stay together and make power up that high. But 86s, do you need a lot of power to drive them? No, but why not?
Why
Why
not?
not just do it?
Why not? Exactly.
Why not? Why not just do it? And I think I'm not aiming for big numbers with this car. It's not really about the numbers. It's always about the torque delivery and how it drives. And you know I'm not going to build a lag monster that you have to drive at 10,000 RPM all the time to make it drive. But it's all about the driving experience and doing something a little bit different along the way.
Talk about the TL70. What was the choice to go with that manual transmission?
Okay, so there was basically two options. There was the TL70 or the J160, right? So the clinching factor for me was the reverse mount starter motor. The 2AZ runs, oh, now I'm starting to speak like you, 2AZ. The 2AZ runs a reverse starter motor. So the starter motor comes in from the transmission side. The problem with that is that there's no recess in the block for you to run a conventional starter motor from the engine side. So there's another guy in Australia, the only other guy in Australia that's done a 2AZ conversion. He actually cut the block to
Oh
fit the
my
starter
God.
motor. Yeah. And look, I mean, it's not in a critical position. There's actually only one support web that goes through that spot where he cut. But, when you're pushing something at 11,000 RPM, you want all of the block there.
No, yeah, totally agree.
You really don't want to be taking parts out of the block. Like just the harmonics itself could be altered just by taking like that chunk of metal out. So the TL70, like there's so much aftermarket support for it. Like there's gear sets, input shafts, like basically anything you want. And the other thing that I was throwing up between the J160 and the TL70 purely because also the shifter position. Now Sam from SQ makes a really nice shifter relocator for the J160, but I was thinking that I could also make something very similar for the TL70 as well. So I've already started my plans for that, and that's coming down the line, but one step at a time. And I think also it's easier to get a TL70 in Australia than it is to get a J160. There's much more BRZ 86s going around than there are like Altezas or even normal IS 200s. So that's also definitely a factor. But I think the ratios are quite similar, no?
Yeah, they're pretty much. We can pretty much say they're the same between the two transmissions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting parallel too, because TL70s are like dirt cheap out here stateside.
Mm.
Like retail
Yeah.
prices still like dirt cheap, and they're widely available. Whereas
Yeah.
I think because beams is so popular out here, even supplies of those are starting to dry up. We're starting to see it.
Mm. And that was, originally I was going to do a turbo beams build for this car. And then, after looking at all of the cars, it's like, well, it's such a well-worn path, is it really being individual anymore, doing a beam swap? Like I could honestly say that, I know that many people that have done a beam swap already that it's not, like it's more refreshing to see a 4AGE with ITBs on it than seeing a beams in an 86 now. It's that overdone. So
Yeah,
that's a little bit of an insight into my personality. It's just that, I don't want to have something, I want people to pop the hood and be like, oh, that's different. That really is different.
or I like when people, like, you can see in their eyes, like they don't really comprehend what they're seeing. Like, how is this
Yeah,
possible?
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So how far along are you with the swap right now?
It's a slow process. It is a slow process. Right now, the motor is sitting in with the gearbox adapter, and everything's mounted up. Currently, I'm actually making an adapter plate to fit an SR20 intake, sorry, an SR20 intake manifold to the motor. So the intake port spacing and size is almost identical between an SR20 and a 2AZ. So I think there's 1 millimeter difference. The port size on the 2AZ is 31 mil, and then the port size on the SR20 is 32 mil. So with a little bit of port matching, it'll be perfect. So yeah, the destroked 2AZ, which I'm calling it a 1.5 AZ, there's been a lot of conjecture of if it will actually work. And I spent a long time researching this to see if it would actually work. And, I've been on all of the Scion TC forums. I've been on all of the Camry ones, all of the Turago ones, all of the RAV4 ones. And, it's all just speculation. So I thought to myself, you know what? Let's just get the two motors and do my own firsthand real world experiment with it because there's absolutely no information on it in the internet. And when I looked, I mean, I looked. So that's why I had those two videos about the disassembly and the comparison between the two motors. So I think a lot of that information would only be privy to, somebody from Toyota with all of the technical data specs on the motors.
Yeah, I should have done my research ahead of time, but I think that 2AZ was the last engine Takayama ran in Formula D in his Corolla. Do you know if this is right?
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the Hasselgren motor.
yeah. I'm not sure if Hasselgren built that engine, but I think it was in the Flying 86 documentary where like the Hasselgren 4AG just like couldn't hold up to the stresses for that long anymore, and so they had to find a
Correct.
different engine option. So I think it's from
Yeah.
like they got like a crate engine off of like another team's hand-me-downs, something like that.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
I'll have to watch that documentary again.
Yeah, me too. It's been a while since I've watched that. But definitely Papadakis Racing have built a really prolific 2AZ that's gone the other way. I think it's a 2.7 liter stroker now instead of de-stroking it. They've stroked it for more capacity. I think that's using all Brian Crow stuff. And that motor has seen its way into a couple of Formula D cars. There's another Scion FRS that was using that motor from Papadakis Racing. So I'm not sure where it is now, because obviously they've built the Corolla motor, the newer Corolla motor. I forget which one it is. 2RZ, I think.
I'll have to look it up
2RZ.
too. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, it's in the Rockstar Corolla that Frederick Asbo was driving.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So they retired the 2AZ for the newer Corolla motor. So, but I mean, look, it's a strong motor. Um, you can see like when you pull it down, it's not really built for performance. You can tell by like the valve angle. But all of the structure is there for me to build something, powerful and reliable, and we can make it work. Like the port sizing is gigantic, so I'm not sure what they were thinking with Toyota that maybe we'll make a performance head, but then everything else will be economy, with economy in mind. So there's a lot of things with the block, open deck block and offset crank. There's a lot of things there that are built specifically to reduce drag and make things cheaper for manufacturing. So once we look at those things, we can start beefing the motor up, and hopefully we end up with a good result.
Going to some questions about being a general automotive enthusiast in Australia, and then to give you a little bit of background, I watched this like mini documentary from Mighty Car Mods where they went to Japan. It was the one where they went to a shop and the guy had the Mickey Mouse exhaust, like literally his
Yep.
exhaust looked like Mickey and Minnie Mouse. And they were talking like Australia is like different from Japan in that you can drink a little bit and drive, but then if you have a blow off valve, you go to jail. Was something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, specifically in Victoria, which is Melbourne, where I live, The road rules are questionable, to say the least. The police here really focus on, how a car looks. If your car is really, really low and loud and you have a big body kit, if your wheels are poking out of the guards by an inch, you're really going to do yourself harm. Um, the laws themselves are actually quite free. That's why we have a lot of sleeper vehicles here because, you're allowed to do engine swaps, you're allowed to increase the power, you're allowed to do all of these things. But as soon as you start modifying the outside of the vehicle to catch your eye, the police are straight all over you. There's a thing here where it's called getting defected, where they slap a yellow sticker on your windscreen saying that it's a defective vehicle. Now there's a couple of options depending on the severity of the defect. There's a minor defect and a major defect. A minor defect, you just need to go to, I guess it's the equivalent of your DMV. You go there, get the car inspected, and they say, yes, okay, this is back to roadworthy standards, and then you're off. Otherwise, with the major defect, you have to go get a roadworthy certificate from a licensed mechanic that says that the vehicle is in a roadworthy condition. So generally that means removing all of your mods, returning everything back to stock, and then getting this certificate and then going to the DMV to get it cleared. Now, the thing is with Australian police is that they're not mechanics. They're not trained to understand what's a safety item and, what's a modification. Like people here, they get defected for being too low, but, a car will drive past that has, rust and, the back axle's falling out of the car while this guy is being pulled over on the side of the road with Brembo brakes and, teen coilovers. So like there's a real discrepancy in the way that modifications are policed in Australia. So generally, if you keep your car sort of quiet and not eye-catching, you can pretty much get away with anything. But as soon as you start to, put big wheels, big body kit on it, then you're just a target.
That's really interesting. I don't know if it's as bad in the US, but you know, one thing that I do admire about other countries is that you guys have like mechanical safety inspection because it's like 100 degrees opposite in the opposite direction in California, where like similar to what you said, a car can be falling apart and like totally unsafe to drive, but if the emissions are clean, then the car's good. So
Yeah, you guys have that smog testing, don't you, in
yeah,
in,
yeah.
in Cali?
So like worse than the DMV for us is like where we do paperwork and register cars. Where we do not want to go is the state referee. So that's like a single guy, a single government employee who has got to look over the car. So yes, yeah,
Ah,
state ref ticket is our like swan song, right? Like, oh no.
mm, yeah, yeah. So that is the equivalent of our EPA here. So if you get defected with an EPA, the vehicle has to be returned completely back to standard, and then it has to be emissions tested at the EPA as well. So which is the equivalent of what you guys have. So when I was back at the tune shop, obviously being an employee there, I had to have a pretty nice car. So I had my S13 1VR, and they had big turbo, external wastegate, big exhaust, everything you could think of. So it was loud and it was low, and because I was working there, I had to keep it that way. So I remember getting defected four times in 4 weeks.
Oh my
So
god.
yeah, and then the last time, the fifth time that I got done was an EPA. So that was pretty much the end of the life for that car. I had to return everything back to standard, and then after that, it was just like it's too hard. I keep losing money every time I get fined for this. I
Hmm.
have to pay for roadworthy certificate. I have to pay for inspections, and you know, uh, I think at that point, that's when the sensible modifier comes out in you. It's like, okay, can I have this modification but make it not so loud?
Hmm.
Like, yeah, sure, go for it. And then that's the real difference between somebody who's going to make their car really loud and really flashy as to somebody who's more performance orientated and be like, okay, I'll put big calipers on the car. I'll do induction. I'll do exhaust, but I'll put proper mufflers on it so it's not blast pipes coming out straight at like a 45-degree angle shooting into the sky, you know? I think that's one of the things that I've learned over the years is that all of my cars, I've always modified them to a point where one, it's undrivable on the street, or two, it's just obnoxious to drive. So, as you get older, you start to value things a little bit differently. Like, do I really need a lock diff on a daily? Nah, yeah, I could probably get away with just putting a two-way in it. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so we're not that far apart in age. I'm 2 years
Yeah.
younger, and I'm
Yeah.
pretty much at that point too, where it's like, I don't really know what car I want to get next, and then I'm not quite sure what I want to do with my Corolla right now because I'm at that in between point.
Yeah.
And if I was to do something to my Corolla, it would actually to be make it more streetable.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the goal for my car as well. I want it streetable. I want aircon. I want to be able to drive it on a Sunday and enjoy myself, and not have to worry about, am I going to get defected here and there. So I think, when you get to that point, it starts becoming a little bit more clear with what way you're going to modify a car. And I think for you, don't ever get rid of the Corolla, man.
Oh man.
Like the price of these things now, I don't think it's going to plateau. I think it's just everything's skyrocketing at the moment.
I'll be honest, like this car for me is not even about the price. It's just like it's tough for me being in this limbo right now where it's like
Yeah.
it's not quite like I could take the plunge, make it more a street car. I could continue doing like resto mod track car, but then
Mm.
it's because I'm at this like crossroads. That's what's really painful for me to be in this limbo right now with that car.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you want a track car, I think you should build a track car and not detract from the car that it is at the moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're not going to get any younger.
Yep.
And then at one point, you're going to be like, where the hell did all of my interior go?
Yep.
One day you're going to want to put your kids in the back seat, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
true.
you don't want to hear all of that maybe you don't want to hear all of that road noise coming through the floor.
No, I was tired of smelling the exhaust already, so
Yeah.
or like smelling like exhaust already after a drive, right?
Yeah. 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 So I've got a question for you.
Uh-huh.
What tips can you give somebody I wouldn't say that I'm beginning at YouTube. I think, I've been here for, almost a year now. So what tips could you give somebody who's already started on the path of YouTube and would like to continue further?
So first of all, thanks for the question, but I have no business answering that question. I am no I am no YouTube expert. I am just on the path of starting this too.
Yep.
Man, I gotta look back, but I want to say I just like started YouTube the beginning of this year, so like I'm not even a year into it. But
Oh, wow.
but I do have a few like more like advice in general. So for me, a lot of things is like see who's winning right now, see who's doing it well or doing it in the way you like or who's successful, and then try to take pieces of that and apply it to, in this case, your own channel, right? Or your own media work.
Yeah.
One person I really admire is Matt Farah from the Smoking Tire. And
Yeah.
one really key piece of advice that like I still remember to this day, it was like he said something along the lines of like, I get this question all the time, how do I get big on YouTube? And he says the very first thing you do is start making
Yes.
videos, because the first few videos you're going to do are absolutely going to suck, but the purpose for making
Mm,
those videos is so you can slowly learn how to suck less.
that's right.
Yeah, so that's definitely been helpful for me. I mean, you've just mentioned the volume of content I put out. I try to put out as much as I can, film as much as I can, so that, now I have like a bigger sample size of like, I didn't really like that, or, I could have done that better, or, oh, I forgot to show that. So it gives me a
Mm,
lot better idea because of the volume, right?
yeah.
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 Which may not work for everyone because I'm putting out this volume. other channels do it differently where it's like low volume, but the content quality is really high, which I really respect too.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think I would, for myself, go down that path as well. Like, I'm not comfortable releasing anything until I'm 100% happy with it, and I think that's why I have such little content out there. But I guess we will learn.
Yeah.
Every day is a new day. So.
Yeah. And then I guess on the other side of that, you can get to a point where it's like too perfectionist. And I'll give you an example. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Noel LOL, his YouTube channel. He is based out of Hawaii, but he said on the podcast he got to the point where like his videos, like because he tried to step it up every time, like it got to the point where he just got sick of it. Like he dreaded going on Adobe Premiere every time. So that's why he's had this like long lull in content, which is really unfortunate,
Ah,
right? Like he burned himself out being too much of a perfectionist.
yeah, yeah. I feel that a bit too. I could definitely see how that could happen.
Yeah. So I guess some other tips. Feedback is really important. It's really tough to get feedback. As much
Yeah.
volume as I put out, it's really tough to get feedback. I mean, the only time I really get feedback is actually in person, locally with with all the NorCal guys. But the feedback you do get is really valuable. Learning where you can adjust or like what people want to see,
Yeah.
and then knowing your market is really important too.
Hmm.
So I'll give you an example. Like one of our media interns here in the building, he does like a lot of flashy cinematic stuff, but that's not in my taste, right? Like I like stuff that you do that's really technical and like well thought out and composed.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean he should stop doing his cinematic stuff because that works for him. That's his market, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Very wise words.
Oh, thank you. What's it called? Yeah, thanks. I don't consider myself a wise person. Just, I just try hard to learn as much as I can.
Yeah.
Did you have
Yeah,
any
sure.
last questions for me before we wrap up the podcast?
What do you love most about AE86s?
What do I love most about AE86 is definitely the community, without a doubt. And I'll give you like a personal story, a personal anecdote. So I think I spent a lot of my life like not knowing myself, not knowing what to do. I've spent
Mhm.
a lot of time like younger and then still probably today, like trying to fit myself into like a certain box. And
Mm.
I know I've said this story before on the podcast, maybe not, but I remember there was like a turning point. Like I started attending more of we have a Corolla meet every first Friday of the month. And I remember this turning point. Like I went to a meet and I came back home and I kind of just like sat and decompressed. And I was like, this is the first time or the first place where like I could really be myself and like everyone likes me for it. And
Mm.
this was like the first
Yeah.
time that happened. And
Yeah.
I think that's been my favorite thing is just the community where like you can be anyone and you still will be you fit in and will be like another piece of this puzzle in the community, and I think that's great, right? To
Yeah.
be a Corolla guy, you don't have to fit into a certain box.
Exactly. That's awesome, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you another example. So I'm not sure if you follow him on Instagram, but jackmob86, Jacob Joffrey's one of our local cast of characters up here in NorCal. And I remember like meeting him for the first time, and I was like, wow, this guy's a little more quirky than I am. That's pretty cool. And since then, I've met like plenty more like quirky and interesting people, and like I love all of them as a part of our Corolla community.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm ever up there, we got to hook up, show me all of your cars, and yeah, man, it's been really great to be on your podcast, man. So I just want to say thank you, and I really appreciate being here.
And likewise, thank you so much again for your time and like agreeing to do this podcast. Again, I always love out of country guests, and then especially from Australia. Like I haven't had one guest from Australia yet, and yeah, man,
Yeah.
keep doing what you're doing. I'm still going through your backlog of videos, and I enjoy every single one. So yeah, man, keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Same to
Yeah,
you, man.
yeah. So before we wrap up, Can you shout out your social? Where can we find you? Where can we watch your videos?
All right, so my YouTube channel is Modify Up, 2 words, and you can find me on Instagram at Modify Up, 1 word. Make sure you get at that, hit that like button, and yeah, check out my videos. You might see something that you like.
Make sure to subscribe too, Seb from Modify Up.
Oh yeah, subscribe, hit that subscribe.
That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, as reviews really help support us. You can do it straight from your desktop. Don't even need an Apple device. This is Autohaus Z. Thanks for all the support, you guys.